Memory is Dreams Reflections is Carl Jung's autobiography. In it, he tells not only his life story, but his theories of consciousness and reality itself. Carl Jung says that the psyche is the half of the world that comes into existence only when we become conscious of it. What he means by this is that we have the physical world, the external material world, but we also have an internal world where we experience emotions. Emotions aren't real physical things, but they are things that we all feel. And we all have to learn how to navigate our own individual internal world of emotions. And if we can't get hold of these emotions, our emotions get hold of us, and then we express ourselves differently in the physical world. It goes without being said that getting a hold on our emotions is pretty important. If we allow ourselves to get angry at certain times, then we'll overreact, or sometimes we'll be too sad to actually get any work done, etc., etc. If we don't get hold of our emotions, and we do end up expressing ourselves in an undesirable way, we can create undesirable, real consequences. So our emotions do have an effect on the physical world. That being said, all outcomes, whether they are good or bad, created by other people, have come from their own psyche. So it's very important to be conscious and aware of how we're behaving and navigating our internal world of emotions. If we all individually analyze our behavior, we can become consciously aware of unconscious processes. So how do we accomplish this as individuals? How can we individually become aware of unconscious processes? Usually this is a pretty difficult thing. If it's unconscious, we're naturally not conscious of these things going on. Take a bad habit, for example. Most of the time, we're not even aware that we're doing it until we've already done it. Maybe it's something like overeating or oversleeping, maybe playing video games. But Carl Jung proposes that we can analyze our dreams to become aware of these unconscious processes. I'll explain why. He thought that our dreams were a view into our subconscious. They're when we're aware of what our subconscious is trying to tell us. But the only way to understand these dreams is if we look at them metaphorically and find the meaning within them. This is because consciously we can communicate with words and language, but subconsciously or unconsciously, it's not something that's communicated with language. It's felt by emotion. And the way to get this emotion across is by telling a story. So we need to analyze these stories that our subconscious is telling us. In other words, we need to analyze our dreams to get the meaning. A great modern day example of this are any movie or TV show that you might see. It follows this trend of the hero's journey. This is because we're taken across the same journey that the main character is, and by the end of the story, they end up learning a very valuable lesson. And most times when we're watching a movie, the best movies that we see are the ones that stir up emotions in us. This is because emotion is the language that transcends language. It's something that all humans naturally feel. And if you look through the history of man, which history itself is the story of man, if you go back to the very beginning, what were cavemen putting on the walls of caves? Cave paintings. The way we pass on information from generation to generation is telling stories in a shorter and shorter fashion. Look at the present day. We have the internet. Right now you're watching this YouTube video, and it's much faster than, say, reading a book. So humans evolve consciously, not physically. Yes, we might evolve physically to some extent, but our brains are evolving much faster than our physical bodies. And this is because we develop tools like the internet, and we even view our own lives as stories. I'm 21 years old right now, and I can tell you my whole life story from when I was 0 to now. Obviously, I'm going to spare you the time for that. But the point is, we view our life linearly. So what this means is we have two lives going on at the same time. We have our physical life, but we also have the life that's in the psyche, our internal emotional life. We experience our life as a myth, but we also experience it physically. We all have struggles to overcome, and that's exactly the same thing as the hero's journey. We all have problems in our own lives to solve, and that is, over time, making us better and better people. So we all exist and experience our lives individually, but what about collectively? This is an idea that Jung calls the collective unconscious. There were many other philosophers throughout history, like Plato, who invented the idea of the forms. And this is something that I'll touch on later. It's very interesting, but Jung had this idea of the collective unconscious. So what exactly is the collective unconscious? Well, it's this plane of existence that we all exist on, not physically, but internally. The collective unconscious and the Platonic world are, in essence, the same thing. It refers to a higher plane of consciousness that every human is part of, and it's the plane of consciousness where things like ideas and concepts come from. Here's a good example. This is a picture of a chair. Here is another picture of a chair. Both of these objects are chairs, yet they both look entirely different. So what is a chair? Well, Carl Jung and Plato would argue that both of these chairs come from a higher concept of what a chair truly is. In other words, the form of a chair. This is Plato's theory of the forms, but in my opinion, it's the easiest way to describe the collective unconscious. It's a large collective mind shared by all humans that contains things like certain behavioral traits that are inherited. So the collective unconscious is this idea that we can communicate on this level, this emotional level that doesn't exist physically, but internally. If we ever have conflict with another person, it's worth noticing that this conflict comes from within ourselves. It's also worth noting that our perception of the world is our perception of ourselves. If we're nervous about something, that tells us something about ourselves. And if we're not as friendly with other people as we are with others, that tells us something about ourselves too. So if our perception of ourselves is our perception of the world, and we want the world to change for the better, it has to start with ourselves. We have to be willing and responsible to say, I want to be better, if we want to see change in the world. So to further expand this idea of the collective unconscious, I'll look at nature as an example. Wild animals are what Jung would call unconscious. They're clearly not conscious in the way that humans are because they don't have all these things that we do. They are still conscious, but it is just unconscious. They exist in a primal state where they're controlled by their emotions. Humans, on the other hand, have things like morals. We have things that keep us from doing things that we may naturally tend to do. Things like lions, for example, just basically act on instinct all the time. If they're hungry, they hunt. And another example would be a beaver. A beaver has a natural, unconscious instinct to build a dam. Or a bird. A bird has a natural, unconscious instinct to build a nest. So just like these animals in nature, humans also have natural, unconscious inclinations to do things. But we need to become consciously aware of these unconscious processes. This is a process that Carl Jung calls individuation. There's really no clear-cut way to the process of individuation because it's just an individual struggle that we all have to go through. We need to face these unconscious parts of ourselves, and we need to face our biggest fears in order to go through this process. We need to embrace our shadow. The shadow self is also a term that Carl Jung coined, but this just relates to our unconscious, our natural instinct to do things. And just like these animals in nature, our natural instinct to do things might be arbitrary. But in the same way that a beaver or a lion or a bird contributes to nature itself, we also contribute to humanity itself. Let's say you have a natural inclination to be a musician. You need to follow that passion. If you're naturally leaning towards carpentry, you need to follow that unconscious passion. Now, going back to what I was saying a little further, we experience ourselves in two ways. We experience ourselves, one, as a myth, and two, physically. As a myth, we exist in here. It's the story we tell ourselves about our lives. This is where we want to go in the future, but where we are now. So if we want to get to where we are in the future, we need to be that version of ourselves now. We need to embrace our unconscious self and our natural inclinations towards things. The key point of individuation is when myth and physical reality meet. The perfect example of this is Jesus Christ himself. Allow me to elaborate on this. Jesus, as we all know, is known as the Son of God, but why is this? According to the myth, God created man and man has committed countless sins. Christ was a way for God to experience the world that he created and was crucified by his very own creation, man. Despite Jesus' message being that of pure love, Jesus was when myth and reality met in the middle. God was able to live through the body of Christ, and this is exactly what Jung argues if we stay down the path of individuation. We all have these natural unconscious desires to express ourselves in the same way of a beaver or a bird. And if we prevent ourselves from expressing these unconscious desires, we're preventing God himself from being expressed. But keep in mind that these unconscious desires aren't anything related to pleasure. It's a higher version of ourselves that we all strive to be. For example, if you want to be the President of the United States, or a musician, or a carpenter, etc., etc. Now, I would like to add really quick that this is not meant to try to convince you of any particular beliefs. Again, this is just a new perspective to consider. To give you more insight on the process of individuation, Carl Jung says that myth is the natural and indispensable intermediate stage between unconscious and conscious cognition. If we all contribute to this process of individuation and become the best version of ourselves, we are bettering humanity by it. In the same way that nature benefits from having beavers, birds, lions, whatever kind of animals, humanity needs people to go towards their unconscious inclinations, but obviously have a conscious hold on it. In other words, we need to consciously become aware of as much of our unconscious self as possible. We all have a part to play in humanity, and the only way to play this part is to be yourself. The world needs you to be who you truly are. Alright, I think that'll be it for this video. This was probably one of my favorite reads of all time, and if any of you guys are interested in picking it up, I highly recommend it. Again, the title of the book is Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung. It's probably one of my top 10 books of all time, at least right now, and I definitely plan on going back and reading more of Jung's works and making videos on that. If there's anything I missed out in this video, please correct me in the comments and I'll pin your comment at the top. I want to have a community where we can encourage and cooperate with each other to build these better ideas. I also want to say that at times I will unmistakably be wrong, but I want to at least put these ideas out there so that we can create better and better ideas over time. If you watched the whole video all the way through, thank you very much. I had a lot of fun making this one. And up next, I think I'll be doing a video on suffering and Buddhism in response to my last video. Thank you guys again for watching. If you enjoyed, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys again next week. Goodbye.